Welcome to Hey Chaplain. My name is Jared Altick, and I'm a chaplain with the police department. Hey Chaplain is the officer wellness podcast, which brings you expertise and wisdom from police officers around the world. The episodes of this podcast are almost entirely evergreen. Because we don't do current events or the daily news, the content of each episode of Hey Chaplain is as good a year from now as it is today. And so let me encourage you to go back through our back catalog. I'd like you to listen to every episode that I've ever produced, but I want you to find an episode on a topic that would be meaningful to you. Today we're talking to a medically retired police officer from the United Kingdom named Ken Anderson. Ken was a Bobby on the beat, an instructor, and also a firearms officer in Leeds, England. But an accident on the job led him down a path that would eventually lead him to standing on a sea cliff, ready to end his life by throwing himself over the edge. In part one, we're going to get to know Ken. We're going to talk about his career, the accident that changed everything, and the attempt to take his life. In part two, which I'll release 1 week later, we'll explore more about why this happens and how this has changed Ken. Obviously, the elephant in the room for this episode is depression that leads to a suicide attempt. Listener discretion is advised. Here's Ken Anderson. Hello, Ken. How are you today?
I'm good, thanks, Jared. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm glad to get you on the show. You came highly recommended.
Thanks for inviting me on. It's going to be a pleasure, I'm sure.
Can you tell me how you decided to become a police officer?
It was a strange one for me. Well, because I don't come from a policing family or anything like that. There was nothing in my life that indicated it. I just knew that I didn't want to do a 9 to 5 job. And obviously, as you can probably tell from the accent, come from England. So did my A-levels, which you do when you're 18 years old. And then before you go to university, I thought, I'm going to have a year out. I'm going to go travel the world. And I went traveling the world. And while I was away, I was thinking, I really want to become a police officer. And I don't need university to become a police officer. And so when I came back, I applied and just got through each stage. And I was 22 when I actually joined. And it felt a bit like a calling. I always wanted to make a difference. I always wanted to help. I didn't want to be stuck behind a desk. It was quite a physical and active job. And let's be honest, the thoughts of driving around with blue lights and sirens and catching bad guys, you play cops and robbers as a kid. And it was just me being a big kid, really. More than
it is
anything.
Exciting. Yeah.
Yeah, it's such an adrenaline rush. Every day was different. And
when you first got started, did you want to pick the town or the area that you were from, or did you want to go to a different part of the country?
No, I moved slightly further away from where I live because I didn't want to police an area that I'd grown up in. I knew that it would cause issues with friends or family, and the last thing you want to do is be put in that position where you're pulling over a car and it happens to be your neighbor or something like that. And it just so.
Did you have a lot of sketchy friends? Yeah.
No, thankfully not. But it's just you just never know, do you? You never know. And I come from a relatively small town that isn't very ethnically diverse or anything like that. So I wanted to move to a bigger city because I knew that it would be a lot more fun policing a nightlife, in a big city as opposed to out in the sticks in the middle of nowhere, not really much going on.
What cities or areas did you work in?
I started off in Leeds, in the north of England, West Yorkshire, which is one of the largest cities in England. It was brilliant because it had one of the largest council estates in Europe, so very economically deprived to a large scale areas. It's similar to, I guess the terminology in America would be like the ghettos and places like that. And then you also had the nightlife, the city, the pubs, the clubs, the bars. There's big sports teams there, and there's lots of variety in things that you can do and different types of policing that you can engage with. And so that's why I decided to move there. And plus, I'm a football fan as well. Proper football, not American football. And I'm a big Leeds United fan, so moving to Leeds was just a no-brainer for me.
Sure.
I definitely like to test myself and challenge myself, but there was also the massive drive for just helping people. I've always wanted to help people, from a young age when you're in the Scouts and you're doing nice things to help people. And
that's satisfying.
And it's very rewarding. It's like, I can only relate it to at Christmas. I get more joy from buying presents for other people and watching their reaction to opening up the presents and seeing the joy than I do from getting presents myself.
Yes.
And so helping other people, there's just no better feeling. You could have 100 bad days at work, but all of a sudden you get one person breaking into a house middle of the night and you catch them at the scene red-handed. That just makes up for the 100 bad days that you've had beforehand. That one real push of adrenaline, and I've actually made a difference. I've helped. I'm a big lad. I'm 6'2", athletic. I've never been into conflict or anything like that, but I've always been healthy enough to be able to handle myself if needed. Mm-hmm. So I remember the first conflicts that I get into, the adrenaline was pumping that much that you get the leg shakes. Yeah. And you're standing there in front of someone and your leg is just uncontrollably shaking with adrenaline pumping through your body. But it was almost like having the uniform gives you almost like a bit of invincibility mindset, where you know that you've got a push of a button, you've got colleagues there that will back you up, that will look after you, that will drop everything to come and support you. And you know that you're trained better than the person that you're faced with. And so there's been very few incidents where I've been on the wrong end of something. Mm-hmm. There have been some. I've had numerous broken bones, broken bruises, and been spat at, kicked, punched, chased with baseball bats, all this kind of stuff. But it's a very different style of policing in the UK because we're unarmed. Yeah. So a lot more of it tends to be communication based because there is no ability to escalate use of force as much as there is in other countries.
Yeah, there's no just pointing a firearm at them and making them stop. You've got to talk them through it or put hands on them.
Yeah, you might have some that are trained as taser officers, but as I'm sure you're aware, taser doesn't work all the time. And, no. If people are quick enough or they've got plenty of clothing on, it's not going to work. It's not going to do it. So it's not a fail-safe. Same with Parva or CS spray. You can point it at someone and they don't care.
Right, that does happen. Yeah,
you point a gun at someone and they react a lot differently.
That's a good transition, actually. So you're wanting to challenge yourself, and you did a section of your career as an unarmed officer in the UK. Yeah, but you made a change. Tell me about that.
I was what I'd call a normal police officer, a Bobby on the beat for about 10 years. And it got to the point where it didn't matter what job I was going to. You'd reel off the same script with different people. You'd just chop and change a couple of words. There was no challenge anymore to anything. And it didn't matter whether I was going to a murder or a sudden death or a burglary or a robbery or whatever it was. It was just becoming very run-of-the-mill for me. And I decided, right, I'm ready for a new challenge. I need to do something else. And I just started looking through the intranet to see what vacancies were coming up. And one of them was a firearms officer. And to me, firearms trained officers, they are the pinnacle of policing. They are the best of the best. They are the fittest. They deal with the nastiest people. And I thought, well, that'll be a nice challenge to see how well I do. So I applied and kept getting through each stage, kept getting further and further along to the point that I got on the course, a 12-week course with a 50% pass rate. I'd never fired a gun before in my life. before doing this, but I was hitting the target. And ultimately, I ended up becoming a firearms officer in West Yorkshire, in Leeds.
Tell me how that is the same or different than being an American member of a SWAT team.
It's actually very similar to the SWAT team. The equipment that we are given, only we can use. We're called in for very specific situations. For instance, as a firearms officer in the UK, you would never be called to a bar brawl or a fight in a pub or anything like that, because you're introducing a weapon into that situation where you just can't. Whereas we would be more dealing with actual pre-planned operations or spontaneous incidents that were occurring, such as a terrorist threat or people with firearms, because there are many, many criminals that are. And so we do have gun crime in the UK, quite a lot of it. And it's dealing with that as well, because we'd be the only people that would be able to match that threat level. I don't know huge amounts about American SWAT, apart from what I've seen on TV and things like that.
And that's always accurate.
Yeah, of course it is. Of course it is. I watched a TV series that was actually called SWAT. And they had like a guy called Hondo or whatever that was the main guy and all this stuff. And I was watching some of the stuff that they do was very far-fetched, but the basic principles are the same, where we would do building tactics. We would go in and we'd have specific ways of searching buildings. It was very prescriptive. So you would have your senior management that would give you the tactic that you would use. They would have all the information and intelligence, and they would say, you're attending this address, and this is the tactic that we want you to do at this address. You could go outside of that if something spontaneous happened that suddenly changed it. But by and large, you're pretty much dictated to how you would do it, be it what we'd call a contain and call out. So you surround the house with the guns pointing at it, and you shout to the occupants to come out one at a time. Or it might be that we're going up to the house and we're breaking through the door straight away and then going in and doing a rapid search through the house and containing people in different rooms until the whole house is secured. Vehicle tactics as well, dealing with various vehicles, trains, aeroplanes, all this kind of stuff. We were trained up in all of that. You do have jobs that stick out, but it's not often the ones that went well that stick out the most. It's normally the ones that don't quite go to plan. They're the ones that stick out. A few years ago, there was a member of parliament that was shot and stabbed in the UK. Our team was the first team on scene, and it was just absolute carnage, and we had what was effectively a lone gunman still out and about, walking around the streets, information coming in from various sources of sightings. There were our firearms team were on one channel, radio channel. There were divisional officers on another one. They'd also set up an emergency channel. So there were effectively 3 radio channels. The communication just wasn't great. And ultimately, the suspect was apprehended and it was all dealt with safely. But the way in which we were able to operate was so limited because of poor communication, both vertically downwards and also laterally amongst everyone. And it highlights more that when jobs do go well, how important the communication was in that.
Yeah.
Because everything just ticks, everyone falls into place, and it's just smooth. And it doesn't matter whether you are a unarmed police officer that's doing a scene guard and containing the scene, keeping members of the public back, whether you're the firearms officer, whether you're the dog unit or K9, I think they call them. It doesn't matter which department you're in. You just know what to do and how to do it, and it all just moves seamlessly.
When things go badly, whether it's that you're exposed to trauma, spend time around a dead body or a lot of blood or something like that, or there's frustration because communication's not working or leadership is making mistakes or whatever it might be. When there is something traumatic or upsetting or frustrating, how did your agency respond to that? Did you guys get any kind of support or encouragement? Was there any kind of follow-up from leadership? No, it was horrendous, if I'm honest. One of the
really depressing things is that police talk a lot about the policing family in the UK, and we refer to ourselves as a big family. And I think that is very true between the low police officer ranks. They do view themselves as a family. They do look out for their colleagues. They do go above and beyond to try and support them and help them and make sure that they're okay. I think that quite often things are let down by the senior leaders in policing, particularly with the length of time that it takes investigations to happen when allegations are made against officers. It's only happened to me a couple of times, and the allegations were incredibly spurious, yet they took so long to investigate. And you see it in the news quite often where incidents happen that gain national coverage, and you're almost crying out for the senior leaders to stand there and go, actually, I support my officers. I've reviewed the body-worn footage. I always feel like I'm starting to see it a lot more often in America now, where the chief of police come out quite early on and go, we've reviewed the CCTV and the body-worn, and the initial indications are that the officers have done absolutely nothing wrong, and we fully support them with their actions. Brilliant. If you feel like your officers haven't done anything wrong, yet you don't support them publicly, the public will automatically think that they've done something wrong.
Yeah.
Because, oh, look, they're not even defending themselves, and even the bosses are standing back. And that is a lonely place to be as a police officer, when you don't feel supported and you feel like you're almost hung out to dry.
How much of this time as a firearms officer were you in a vehicle, or, I mean, I assume you guys weren't on foot patrol. And so did you always deploy in a vehicle? Did you ever patrol in a vehicle?
Yeah, it was always, we were basically what's called a force-wide resource. So we would go to our briefing centrally, and then from there we would be crewed up in two of us in a car with all our weaponry, and we would be deployed to specific areas to go on patrol. Sometimes it would be out on foot, where we'd have to walk through shopping centres, and particularly after the Manchester bombings, after the Ariana Grande concert in Manchester, where a big bomb went off. After that, we were out patrolling shopping centres with our long arms out, which is our long rifles. And the rest of the time, it would be out and about in cars. We could go anywhere and deal with any number of different things.
Was that the situation the day of your accident?
We were sent to a report of a stolen vehicle that a surveillance unit had followed, and they were believed to be about to commit an armed robbery. And they were in a supermarket car park. And as we drove towards the supermarket car park, they saw us and set off. There was only one way in and one way out. So they ended up ramming our vehicle that we were in. We were doing maybe 30 miles an hour, 20, 30 miles an hour. They were doing 40, 50. So it was a fairly substantial head-on collision. And as a result of that, I ended up with a herniated disc in my back, which meant crippling pain for a long time. And I was off work for just short of 6 months. And that's when things really started to take a bit of a turn for me.
Okay.
Because that was in 2018 when the accident happened. And I was off work when my partner gave birth to our first child. And so it was nice in some respects that I was at home more than I would have been otherwise.
Right.
But I was not able to do a lot of things that I wanted to do, lifting the baby, carrying the baby for long periods of time. You know, I was in an incredible amount of pain. And I had no contact from my supervision while I was off.
Really?
The only time that I was contacted by my direct line manager was after about 5 months. They came to my house and served me with papers, which are half pay papers. So even though I'd said I'm going to be back in the next couple of weeks, they still came and gave me papers to say that if I wasn't back within a month, I'd be going on to half pay. And that was the first contact that I'd had.
Well, that doesn't feel like family.
No,
not
at all. And of course, when your supervision don't speak to you or find out what's going on, colleagues start to think, oh, is he swinging the lead, or is he milk? Is he actually as bad as it is, and this kind of stuff. And my close friends knew how bad it was. They'd come and seen me and visited, and could see the trouble that I had just getting off the sofa. But I returned to work, and the intention was that I would get all of my permits back, my firearms permits, complete all the training, and get back out as a firearms officer. But then this little thing called COVID hit. I don't know if you've heard of that.
Yeah.
And they needed someone to basically do an office role. And the first person that they picked on was me.
Yeah.
Because obviously I was not fulfilling the role that I was meant to be doing. I was basically a glorified secretary in this little pokey office, recording sickness from police officers, giving them advice on policies and what to do, and also advising the senior managers about it. And I hated it. And it was lonely, and I wasn't part of the team, and I was stuck in this office for large chunks of the day, listening to people, chasing people up we didn't know the severity of this disease at the time.
Sure.
So I'm there speaking to people who I knew personally, who were suffering really badly and struggling to breathe, and you're there thinking, am I going to be speaking to them again tomorrow or not? It was a very, very strange time, but it started to really affect my mental health. And it got to the point where once COVID had started to die down a bit and things slowly started returning to normal, I'd realised that my firearms career was over. I was still suffering with back pain, and the chances of me getting back frontline were slim, but I didn't want to stay in this little office. And so I was able to engineer a move to the training department, where I was training all the new recruits. And initially I loved it.
Yeah.
Outwardly, I was excelling. I was such a good trainer. I was passionate. I was knowledgeable. Other people who I knew might have only had 4 or 5 years service and were in training roles, whereas I was coming in with almost 20 years policing experience, and 5 years of that as a firearms officer, and having done other roles within police as well. And it was brilliant. But I missed the front line. I missed being out there. And I felt like I'd lost a big chunk of me as a result. So although on the outside I was doing really well and performing well and a very highly thought of trainer, on the inside I was crumbling and getting worse and worse, to the point that you'd work Monday to Friday in training. So I'd be bringing my pack up in on a Monday, and on a Friday I'd take it out the fridge and tip it in the bin, because I wouldn't be eating during the week. I'd be hiding away. And after a good few months of that, my sergeant at the time said, listen, take the rest of the set off. You need a bit of a break. And so I took 2 or 3 days off, which then turned into a week, which then turned into a month. And my mental health just kept getting worse and worse and worse. And I couldn't explain it at the time. I didn't know what was going on. I felt incredibly isolated and alone. And then one day, I was up quite late and just started researching suicide hotspots. I wrote letters I had 2 children at this point. One will have been 4 and one will have been 2. I wrote letters to them. I wrote letters to my partner. I then stayed up all night, got them ready for school and nursery, dropped them off, kissed them goodbye, and then autopilot kicked in, I guess. I set off on this hour-long drive, crying constantly, uncontrollably crying, just could not stop crying. And I knew what I was going to do when I got there. And I was in part of my head was saying, stop, put your foot on the brake, turn around. No good is going to come of this. You've got to stop yourself. But I physically could not stop myself from keeping on going.
The place that you picked was where?
It was out at the coast. It was a nature reserve. I turned up in the car park. This part makes me chuckle because when I got out the car and I started walking towards the entrance to it all, there was a member of staff there, and they said, it's a £7 entry or something like that. And I was thinking to myself, I cannot believe that I'm going to pay £7 to go and kill myself. Like, what has this come to? And thankfully, well, I say thankfully, but for some reason their card machine wouldn't work, so they couldn't do a contactless payment. And the person said, "Oh, don't worry about it. Just pay on your way back out. We'll have it fixed by then." And I was thinking, yeah, all right, mate, I'm not going to be paying. And I made my way to this viewing point, and I must have been there hours. And
is it a place you've been before, or
no,
is it specifically you picked a place you didn't have connections to?
I didn't have connections to it. It was just somewhere that I'd Googled that said people do it a lot there. And I thought, it must be a good place then.
Wow.
That was it. It was one of these nature reserves where it's out at the coast and there are loads of puffins and different types of seabirds all along the cliffs, and people go there to watch them. Avid bird watchers and things like that will go there. And I remember finding this secluded little viewing point because I didn't want anyone around me. I didn't want anyone there. And I must have been there hours just crying and crying and crying. And thoughts running through my head about what I was doing, what I was about to do. And when I talk about it now, I describe it as a battle between love and hate, because I had incredible love for my children, my partner, and my family, and everyone else, that I just wanted the absolute best for them. But I had massive hate as well, and it was hatred of self. And the hatred of self was that strong that it overpowered the love I had for my family. So I would have died for my children. I would have taken a bullet for them. I would have, you'd do anything for your kids and your partner. Yet the hatred of self was that powerful that it convinced me at the time that the most loving thing that I could do would be to not be there anymore. And I eventually made the decision to go over the railing. And just before I tried doing it, I felt this. It was like someone had opened a tap in my ankle, and all of the stress, all of the pain, all of mental and physical was just draining out of my body. And I was becoming at peace, and it was calm, and the birds were flying slower through the air, and the sun started coming out through the clouds, and all this kind of stuff. I felt peace.
Because you were resolved?
Oh, yeah. But it was
we're actually taught to look for that when someone who has been in distress is suddenly okay. A lot of people interpret that as, they're better. They may not be. They may have made their plan and resolved to end everything.
So, I was absolutely content with what I was about to do. There was no pain. There was no shame. There was no. It was the right decision. I was 100% convinced it was the right decision. What I was about to do.
Then what stopped you?
Unbeknownst to me at the time, just as I was starting to climb over this wooden railing, there was an old woman behind me that I didn't know was there. And it sounds incredibly corny and cheesy, but she just said, "Are you okay?" And that stopped me enough to be able to just my first thought was, I can't do it in front of her. I couldn't put her through watching that. So I stepped back down, and I think the rest of this is a bit hazy and blurry. I can't remember a huge amount, but I remember sort of like shaking my head as if to say, no, I'm not okay. And then I think she asked if I wanted to go for a cup of tea. How English is that? Do you want a cup of tea? Go for a cup of tea or something like that. And I think I shook my head, and she just stayed there. She didn't really say anything, but she just stayed there. And then after that, the police were involved. They'd obviously been called, and the mental health crisis team were called, and things kind of like escalated from there. And that was basically what I refer to as my Phoenix Rising moment, because that was my absolute rock bottom, ready to go. I didn't. And after that, I started a road to recovery, which ultimately meant that I had to end my police career because I was medically retired as a result of the physical back injury and my mental health. But I was able to start a process of recovery to still be here now.
Ken came within seconds of taking his own life. And because of that intervention, where that woman asked him, "Are you okay?" Ken's life was saved, and Ken has the opportunity to have an impact on countless others. In part 2, we're going to talk to Ken about that, about why a police officer would get to this point in the first place, and what he's learned coming through the other side. Here's a sneak peek of part 2.
The negative side of things was that he told the rest of my team, "Don't pester me. He's going through a rough time. Can't talk about it. Can't disclose it. But just make sure to give him some space. And if there's any updates, I'll let you know." What that then meant was that people didn't check in on me, didn't message. And so the whole time that I was off, I was thinking that no one cared. No one valued me. No one thought anything of me. And then in December, I went on a Christmas do with my old team, and it was the first time that I'd seen them in 18 months or whatever.
Yeah.
Since being off work. Almost 2 years, in fact. And none of them knew what had happened.
Oh, wow.
And so I'd spent 2 years being at home thinking that no one cared.
This show is a free resource because of those supporters who are quietly helping behind the scenes. If you want to help this show reach more cops, more chaplains, and other first responders around the world, please follow the link in the episode description to support the show. The views expressed here are the personal views of the host and our guest and do not necessarily represent the views of any law enforcement agency or its components. If you like this episode, please share it with a cop or someone who loves a cop. Thank you for listening to Hey Chaplain, and as always, pray for peace in our city.